Okay, I wrote a small, I don't know what I want to call it earlier. I guess an article maybe, small, something small about the difference in paints pre-03 versus today. Some things I touched on is the hotter it is, the harder the paint, the colder it is, the softer the paint, different things you should use to wash your bus with. Today's buses, this is a very new bus. If you were to wash this bus with the most expensive horsehair, hog hair, whatever brush that's on the market, if you were to wash this bus, whether it's hot or cold, with that brush, it will leave brush scratches in it. It's not maybe, it will. And they will be noticeable. So we only use wash mitts to wash the new paints for two reasons. One, they're very soft today compared to 10-15 years ago. Two, they're a lot more shiny than they used to be, which is a great thing, because the results on all the new buses, as far as the clear coat is concerned, the buses are amazing. They look deep, they're wet, they're shiny. I also talked about swirl marks, and that I had developed a 10-step process. So the reason why I'm videotaping this bus is we did a cut and buff, or a sand and buff, on this bus about 2 months ago. And the guy that owns this bus owned a trucking company, a pretty large trucking company. Believe it or not, all of his trucks were always spotless. So this guy is very picky. I mean, and he's very detailed, and he knows about detailing. He loved the job that we did. This particular paint job, we did a cut and buff and or a sand and buff. We started with 1500 grit, and many of you know polishing is reducing a larger scratch to the smallest scratch possible, so that you can barely see it with the naked eye. So that's what polishing is. So when you're cutting and buffing a coach, even when you're cutting it, you're essentially polishing it, but that's your largest scratch that you're starting with. So our largest scratch we started with when we started polishing this is a 1500 grit sand scratch. And then we went to a 2000 grit, which is a much finer grit sandpaper. We stepped it out to a 2000 grit dry, and then we went to a 3000 grit wet called Trizac, 3M Trizac. And then at that point, even though the bus is sanded, it's semi-shiny. And then it goes from that to buff. And so when we buff, and if you ever have anything cut and buffed, if the people doing it are not they don't have to do all the steps. I do that because the paint is much softer today than it used to be. And so I try to use as little friction as possible on the paint, because I think it's what's best for the paint, what's best for the bus, and what's best for you, the owner. So anywhere you have it done, if they don't necessarily have to step it out, it's not like they have to do that. I do that. It's a very expensive process. Only in sandpaper, it's about $1,000 in sandpaper to do one of these, but I love the results. Okay, and then we go to buff, and then so that's our next scratch, and then we buff it all out to a shine, but then it has swirl marks everywhere. And so there's the issue. And we have a lot of people talking about swirl marks. And so here's an example of a bus that was cut, I would call it, cut or sanded, cut and buffed. I mentioned the 3 steps to get to the buffing. Then we buff, and then after it's buffed to a shine, and you can see the sun's on this side, and if you ever see this bus out on the road, it doesn't have any swirl marks, it has no sand scratches, it has no brush scratches, And yes, the paint is very soft. All the paints today are soft, no matter what bus you have, and no matter who paints it and what kind of clear they use, whether it's Standox or Sickens or PPG or whatever it is, whatever clear that they're using, they're all very, very soft these days. This bus has no sand scratches, no swirl marks, and no brush scratches. It's been done for a month. We just washed this bus and dried it. It's been done for 2 months, so this is probably the seventh or eighth time we've washed this bus since it was finished. It has no fillers at this point. It has nothing hiding anything. The bus has no swirl marks in it, but it's a 10-step process, and so you're reducing buff scratches. That's what they are. When you see swirl marks, they're scratches from a buffer, scratches from a wool pad. You're reducing those scratches in the next 10 steps that we did. What we're doing is we're reducing those scratches to a scratch that's not noticeable. Okay, and that's what polishing is. And so that's what we did to this bus. It took me over 10 years to develop the steps in the process, because after they changed paint, it threw everybody for a loop, whether it be the painter, the manufacturer, or the customer, because we had to change the way we washed, we had to change the way we sanded and buffed them, they had to change the way they painted them, we had to change how we care for our paint jobs from, let's say, 03 until now. They changed the paint in either, somewhere between 03 and 06 and all the different manufacturers, but now everybody's paint is virtually the same as far as, the softness or hardness. So going back to what I wrote earlier, if you have a buff glaze and wax, or a cut and buff, or you're just having somebody buff out a tree scratch, and that happens a lot. Let's say the top panel had a tree scratch in it. Whenever whoever is fixing it, whether it's you or you have a professional detailer or a detailer or anybody buffing on your bus or on your paint, when they're finished, if they don't wash it and dry it, and you drive 2,000 miles and then you decide to get it washed, there's a good chance sometimes you can walk out there and look at your paint and there's going to be swirl marks that you didn't see prior to leaving your last destination where you had it fixed. And that's because a lot of the products today that get rid of swirl marks are what I consider fillers, and they look great while you're sitting there, but after the first or second wash job, everything whoever did to the bus that used fillers starts coming through. And so I talked about results, and the only way you can really check the real results of a cut and buff, buffing a tree scratch, or buffing period, is to wash and dry it and look at it in the sun. And if you wait until you're at your next destination, sometimes could be 1,000, 500, even 500 miles. It would be a pain to have whoever did it come back and fix it. So this is more of an educational thing than anything, because trust me, there's a lot of wonderful, amazing, professional detailers, a lot of bus owners that know how to buff and know how to do it right, and then there's a lot of professional detailers that shouldn't be called professional out there today. I don't know many of them, and I'm not throwing dirt on anybody. I'm not mentioning anybody. I don't know anybody that is not. I have had to fix a lot of other people's jobs over the years. I never really dive into who did it. I just dive into getting your bus back looking like a $2 million bus or a multi-million-dollar bus. So this is the end result of everything that I was writing about earlier. Soft paint, beautiful paint. It's fairly hot out today, so the paint is probably at one of its most hardest stages. The softer it is, the colder it is, the softer the paint. I would never, ever, ever, ever put any type of a brush on a bus like this. The paint is very flat, very shiny. So if you put a brush on it, you will notice the brush scratches. We use synthetic wool mitts. That's the only thing I recommend. Other people use microfiber towel, microfiber wash mitts. I don't recommend them, and the reason why is a microfiber wash mitt, let's say a microfiber towel, if it picks up a small stone, it doesn't have enough cushion on it and to push it back into the material far enough. It'll end up scratching your bus terribly. And also microfiber things stick to microfiber, a lot of things, and sometimes you might not notice it and it can do damage that way. If you're very careful with a microfiber wash mitt, I guess it's okay, or a wash system microfiber, I guess it would be okay. I recommend the synthetic lamb's wool, either Swirl or swab it, and for multiple reasons. Dirt and debris, if it does get in there, it's pretty simple. You just dip it in the water, shake it out, and it all comes out. If something were stuck in there, it has a place to go, so it's not putting 100% of the pressure of whatever it is onto the paint, creating damage. So that's why I recommend it. We're gonna dive into some soaps and versus shampoos and different waxes and recommendations and things like that pretty soon. But today I just wanted to shoot this small video to show everybody this is what you should expect, and it can happen. It takes a while. It's very intense job. 160 hours. We used to be able to sand and buff a bus prior to my 10-step after buff. Prior to that, we could sand and buff a bus between 80 and 120 hours, depending on where we were doing it and who was involved. Now, if we have the bus all to ourselves, we're able to get on it with a 3-man team and stay steady on it. It's taking a minimum of 160 man hours to get these results right here, and so that's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it. And like I say, this bus has been washed probably almost 10 times, if not 10 times. No swirl marks, no scratches, no brush scratches. We use synthetic wool mitts to wash it with it, and these are your results. Okay, so soft paint, cut and buff, 10 steps after buff. That's your results. Okay, if anybody needs any help either locating somebody and they want to get something like this done, locating somebody in your area, or you want to do something like this yourself, I'm always available, and I can help you out with the steps and the processes and where to get the necessary tools and compounds and sandpapers that you need to do this, to do a job like this. This is a sand and buff and or cut and buff. Or if you need any help in any way, even if you have a tree scratch and and you want to try to get it out, or you have somebody that wants to do that and you want me to help guide them, I'm available at any time, and you can get me through the page if you'd like. So anyway, here it is, one for the books. Have a good one, guys.